Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture of literature. I'm Adrian Ford, and we are here for another poetry discussion. Today's poetry discussion will come to us from Emily Dickinson, but fret not, they need not all come from Emily Dickinson. I am just trying to get myself back into the swing of doing regularized poetry discussion videos. So if you have any suggestions or requests for what poem you think should come next in this series, as we're going to come very close to 200 poetry discussions in the poetry discussion playlist here on this channel this calendar year, leave them in the comments section below. And I can't promise I'm going to get around to anything, but always having those ideas present, because I will just get stuck in Emily Dickinson and Charles Bukowski if I don't make a concerted effort not to do that. And hey, with 1,775 poems, there's enough Emily Dickinson to go around, but I'm hoping to have a series later this year, starting later this year, where I'm going to go poem by poem or 5 poems at a time through Emily Dickinson, probably 5 poems at a time. That would make a whole lot more sense. I would have some chance of finishing that in my lifetime, maybe. So there is that. If you have suggestions, like I say, leave them in the comment section below. And if you want to help me out with what I'm doing here on this channel, hitting the like button at some point in time always does the trick. And if you find yourself here by chance but not design, consider hitting that subscribe button, because literature is all I talk about on this channel. So the poem in question is I Prayed at First a Little Girl. And, well, I'll just read the poem and we'll get into it. I prayed at first a little girl because they told me to, but stopped when qualified to guess how prayer would feel to me. If I believed God looked around each time my childish eye fixed full and steady on his own in childish honesty, and told him what I'd like today and parts of his far plan that baffled me and mingled side of the mingled side of his divinity. And often, since in danger, I count the force 'twould be to have a God so strong as that to hold my life for me, till I could take the balance that tips so frequent now. It takes me all the while to poise, and then it doesn't stay. So this is poem 576 in Emily Dickinson, estimated to have been written in 1862. Emily Dickinson at the time would have been around 32 years old, depending on the month, as she was born in 1830. And let's allow ourselves a little bit of biographical criticism here, not in order to understand the words in the poem, but I think really in order to better comprehend what might be going on with the overall sort of direction of the poem. Emily Dickinson here would have been 32 years old in 1800s America, 1862. Emily Dickinson was single at this point in time. Emily Dickinson had, to the best of anyone's knowledge, no real romantic bindings. Emily Dickinson would have been sort of a different type of character already by this time in her life. Would have been very isolated, might not be a fair term, but I think it's probably the right term. And when you're looking at individuals who are okay, I'll take this onto the self. I'm 37, and I live on my own, and sort of an isolated individual, have no real romantic bindings. I can see from this point the rest of my life coming. In 1860s America, for a woman in her 30s, this would have been twice as true as it is for me here today. This would have been twice as true, 5 times as true. The rest of Emily Dickinson's life was fairly well written out on the wall in front of her. And I'm not saying that that is the right thing. I'm not saying that is the fair thing. I'm not saying that that is what should have been, only that that is what would have been. So that is sort of the framing for this poem, because we think we have Emily Dickinson's poems sort of chronological in order. And despite the fact that they were not published in her lifetime, what we're looking at when we have this Emily Dickinson's complete poetry is sort of miraculously her diary in words. And so when you're looking at poetry, you're not looking at nonfiction, you're not looking at fiction, you're looking at poetry, which has a speaker, but not necessarily characters. So one of the things that I think is interesting in how fiction operates is that fiction is more true than nonfiction. Why is that? How can I say that? Well, if you're writing, for example, a biography on old Einstein there, you weren't there. Even Walter Isaacson, who's currently writing a book on Elon Musk, is there, but he's not Elon Musk. So even when you have that first-hand access to the person about whom you're writing nonfiction, that person is undoubtedly going to self-censor things. Even someone who seems to give zero about what you think, like Elon Musk, he's going to self-censor things, not necessarily even to his benefit, but just so that they make sense to him in his own words. But with nonfiction, here's the thing. In nonfiction, there's very little about you that makes you unique. Now, there's very little about you that makes you unique that might seem to be depressing. But I assure you, it is more relieving than that. It unburdens you. Because all of those things with which you struggle, that you think, all of the things with which you struggle that beat you down on a daily basis, they are not your struggles. They are struggles that have been around so long as this thing between our ears, this mechanism between our ears, this machine between our ears has been standard issue. Because of that, when someone is writing fiction, they are unburdened by the need to filter. Poetry, I think, works in a similar manner. And here's what I really want to get to with this. Here we have Emily Dickinson questioning questioning one of the primary institutions of the Christian theology, prayer. But in questioning prayer, she questions divinity itself. There is no authority in the world which Emily Dickinson inhabits without the authority of God. She lived in a very religious time in a very religious country. And here she is questioning not just the institution of prayer, but the idea of divinity itself, the idea of the Almighty. And that is poem 576. But we need not stop there. I just think that this is a very good poem for presenting this case, because the poem prior to this on the kissing page, poem 575, begins with this little ditty. Heaven has different signs to me. Sometimes I think that noon is but a symbol of the place, and when again at dawn. So, poem 574, to cheat herself it seemed she tried, as if before a child. To fade tomorrow rainbows held, the sepulchre to hide. Poem 573, the test of love is death. Our Lord so loved, it saith, what largest lover hath another doth. Poem 577, the poem after this, if I may have it when it's dead, I'll be contented so. If just as soon as breath is out, it shall belong to me. Until they lock it in the grave, 'tis bliss I cannot weigh. For though they lock thee in the grave, myself can own the key. We have all of this. 578. The body grows without the more convenient way, that if the spirit like it hide, its temple stands alway. We have all of this questioning of death. We have all of this mention of religion in the poems right around it. And I know death and religion are fairly ubiquitous in Emily Dickinson. But we have Emily Dickinson, depending on the critic. And so this is one of the best things about art, right? Art is not propaganda, in that even when an artist presents an argument in a poem, in a piece of fiction, the artist is... Retweets are not necessarily endorsements, right? It's sort of the same idea there. When an artist presents an argument, it is not necessarily that he or she is adopting that argument, but he or she has to present that argument as fully as they can, because the character in question presenting said argument does endorse that argument. But what makes something art is that we are able to, even with someone like James Joyce, who presents a lot of political things in his work, whose opinions on those political things we generally understand, presents characters on both sides of arguments as full people. So that if you are reading James Joyce, you might find yourself understanding and empathizing with a character on either side of the political divide, versus propaganda, which is just saying, hey, them people are bad, we people is good. That's what art does. But Emily Dickinson, depending on the critic, presents some of the most compelling arguments for God, or some of the most compelling arguments against God. And that is truly art. So what do we have here? We have preserved in this poem the struggles of Emily Dickinson. And that's in the fact that we have her poetry presented in basically chronological fashion, so far as we can tell, and the fact that critics on any side of any argument are able to utilize these poems to say what it is they want to say, is pretty indicative of the fact that we have preserved, encapsulated here, Emily Dickinson's own struggles. And they are so honest, and they are so out there, that we are once again reminded that there's very little about us that is us, right? And that's disconcerting, but it should also be comforting, because none of the struggles that we have are struggles which are completely foreign to anyone else. None of the struggles we have are struggles that cannot be either one for one grafted onto someone else's thoughts, ideas, work, their own struggles, the struggles they present to us, or translated, right? So Emily Dickinson's poetry might be completely allegorical for you in the struggles that you're having. I went through the struggle with religion. They could be seen as, so perhaps you are struggling, with a relationship, right? We've all been through breakups or XYZ. Pretend you were in a relationship with a significant other who was pretty controlling, but you actually loved them. You genuinely loved them, and they left you. What is that dynamic like? Because no longer are you controlled by that you can graft that struggle onto Emily Dickinson and the things that she presents here. And we have one of the reasons that I think that this poem is so incredibly useful for examining the struggles that Emily Dickinson goes through with religion is this very first stanza. I prayed, at first, a little girl, because they told me to, but stopped when qualified to guess how prayer would feel to me. Here, we have Emily Dickinson, the narrator, the speaker, going from child to God herself. When I was a kid, I prayed. But when I assumed the authority necessary to feel and understand how that would feel, I stopped. But we have the assumption from child to God. We also have the transcendence from follower to individual. Because they told me so. I prayed because they told me so. But I stopped when I was qualified to understand how that would feel. The temerity, the pure, I don't even have the words for it. Here we have Emily Dickinson saying not only that she has transcended the following. They, as a child, would have been your elders, right? But there's this weird phase there where they would have strictly been the church. Young adulthood, young adult Emily here, young adult the speaker, I shouldn't say Emily, it's the speaker. Young adult the speaker would not simply have been directed by her elders, it would have been taking the form of the church. The they in question would have been religious authority. Not just elders, but religious authority. The speaker, who finishes out this stanza, how I understood how prayer would feel to me, is putting themselves above the church, saying, I understand this in a way that probably you don't, because you've been going about this so haphazardly. You've been just telling people to pray. Now put yourself in God's shoes. How would that feel to you? Put yourself in God's shoes? What do you mean? You can't do that. And by the way, putting yourself in God's shoes, God is the Almighty. God understands. God knows. God's telling you, you have to pray. Which brings us, I think, full circle to the beginning point that I had here. In that first stanza, the Almighty is pulled into question, and the Almighty is sort of assumed as unable. The Almighty is presented as one who can craft an entire universe, but is unable to empathize with the wanderings of a child. And like I said, that is a stupefying sort of questioning of authority, a stupefying sort of questioning of religion in general, a stupefying sort of questioning of the entire bedrock of the community in which Emily Dickinson would have been living. And the speaker in this poem, the speaker in question would have been living. And I think, I mean, so there are hallmarks in life. When you, in our society, turning 21 is a hallmark, turning 18 is a hallmark. But then there are hallmarks which are sort of more monumental and less indicated by society. Turning 30, for example. Especially in Emily Dickinson's world, turning 30 is a woman. Especially in Emily Dickinson's world, turning 30 as a woman and you're single. Which it would have been an event which sharply focuses the remaining years of your life. And when the remainder of your life is sharply focused, but is out of tune with the values society has put on life, right? Here's the values that society puts on life. Here's where you're going. So when you're looking here and you see in your peripheral everything that society is telling you is the right thing, is the good thing, is the moral life, sure pulls into question all of those things which are the meaning of life, which you were told are the meaning of life. Because you're going here, baby. One way or another. Those roads, those off-ramps to get you here, they're already passed. So this brings into question the real meaning of life. And if you're looking at the meaning of life separate from what society tells you is what the good life is, mightn't that also sharply focus those things which you are told death is about and what happens there? So once the meaning of life, I don't want to say is abandoned, but is forsaken for an individualistic meaning of life, death and what happens in death is the next logical question, is the next logical institution with which the individual must struggle. That is all I have for this, a poetry discussion for I Prayed at First, a Little Girl by Emily Dickinson. Again, if you have any suggestions for poems you would like to see me do on the channel, leave them in the comments section below. I can't make any promises that I will get around to them, but I'm definitely looking for other names, other titles, things like that. And if you want to help me out with what I'm doing here on the channel, hitting that like button always does the trick. And I hope to have you Monday for the next poetry discussion, but I'm going to have at least one video in between.